I had been dreaming about this family vacation for months, imagining laughter and sunsets. So I asked my parents, expecting a smile or even a pause, but they said no. "We can't afford it this year," they told me. My chest sank, but I forced a smile. Later, I scrolled through social media and froze. My sister's kids were in first class, grinning as if money was no object. I didn't say a word, not yet, but I felt every bit of that unfairness, and something inside me whispered that this story wasn't over. I stared at the calendar on my desk, circling dates with a pen I'd used more out of habit than hope. Every time I thought about asking my parents for a family vacation, my stomach twisted into knots of excitement and nerves. I had been looking forward to this moment for months, imagining us all laughing together on a beach, the sound of waves in the background, my parents smiling at me as if I mattered just as much as my sister's kids. The thought alone made my heart race. I wanted it to be real, wanted them to say yes and make me feel like I belonged in their plans too. When I finally found the courage to ask, I tried to keep my voice light, almost casual. "Mom, Dad, do you think we could plan a family vacation this summer?" I watched closely for their reactions, hoping for hesitation, a small pause, a twinkle of amusement, maybe even a laugh and a teasing. "Of course, Lily, you're always part of our plans." But what I got instead froze me in place. "We can't afford it this year," my father said, his voice calm but final. No pause, no hesitation, just the words hanging in the air. I blinked, staring at him as if expecting him to suddenly grin and say, "Just kidding." My heart sank, my chest tight with disappointment. I tried to hide it, forcing a smile, nodding politely, but inside, a storm had erupted. My stomach churned with frustration and sadness, and I felt that familiar ache of being overlooked, the quiet sting that had followed me since childhood whenever I saw my sister and her kids receive the attention and privileges that seemed just out of my reach. I looked at my watch, almost hoping the minute hand would tell me that somehow this had been a bad dream, that they were about to laugh and tell me they'd been joking. But the time ticked on, relentless, and reality pressed in. They were serious. I tried to keep my voice steady, offering a polite, "Oh, okay, I understand," while my mind raced, trying to reconcile the words I'd just heard with the image I had of us as a family laughing and planning. The evening passed slowly. I excused myself to my room, sitting on the edge of my bed, my laptop balanced on my knees. I opened social media almost instinctively, scrolling absent-mindedly while trying to distract myself. I paused at a post from my sister, Ava, and my chest tightened. Her kids were grinning from the seats of a first-class airplane, bags of designer brands tucked beside them, and my parents' names were tagged in a photo caption. "Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making this possible." The color drained from my face. I stared at the image, at the smug little smiles of the children, at my parents beaming as if everything were perfectly ordinary. My hand shook slightly as I set the laptop aside. I didn't say a word. I didn't even speak aloud to the walls that had once felt like the safest place in the world. I felt the unfairness like a weight pressing down on me, heavy and persistent. The rational part of my brain told me I must be misunderstanding something, that there had to be a reasonable explanation, but the emotional side, the part that remembered every overlooked birthday, every ignored request, felt a surge of betrayal. I tried to distract myself with mundane tasks. I organized my files at work, cleaned my apartment, even folded laundry with meticulous care, but each time I closed my eyes, I saw the post again. I thought about the lavish meals my parents ordered, the new clothes I had noticed for their dog during my last visit, the gourmet groceries I had seen delivered without a second thought. Something didn't add up. My mind was a whirlwind of questions I wasn't ready to voice yet. Were they really struggling financially, or had I been kept in the dark intentionally? Were these choices made out of love, or was it simply favoritism? I went for a walk later that evening, trying to shake off the bitter taste of disappointment and confusion. The streets were quiet, and the cool night air should have been calming, but it only amplified the thoughts swirling in my head. I passed by a store window and caught my reflection, my face pale, eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I whispered to myself, maybe I'm imagining things, maybe I'm overreacting. And yet, deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, a quiet, insistent whisper that perhaps my parents' story about not affording a vacation wasn't the whole truth. Returning home, I sat back at my desk and opened my laptop again, this time scrolling more deliberately, paying attention to details I had overlooked before. I noticed subtle hints in Ava's posts, mentions of special gifts, exclusive events, private club access, little clues that suggested the family had resources far beyond what I had been told. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was confusion mixed with anger, laced with a sense of injustice that refused to be ignored. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the apartment wash over me. I couldn't confront them yet. I wasn't ready, and I knew I had to observe carefully before making any moves. But I clenched my fists lightly, feeling a determination rising alongside the hurt. Something inside me whispered that this story wasn't over. Not yet. And if they thought their secret was safe, they hadn't reckoned with the quiet patience and careful observation of someone who loved her family enough to hold them accountable without losing herself. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my emotions, disappointment, suspicion, and the faintest flicker of resolve. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I simply sat in the dim glow of my desk lamp, heart pounding, mind racing, wondering what steps I would take next, and whether the people I had always trusted the most had truly been honest with me. Scrolling through my feed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had drawn a line between my life and theirs, a line that I hadn't agreed to, a line that cut through the heart of what I thought my family stood for. My sister, Ava, always polished and effortless, appeared in my screen with her 2 children, grinning from their seats in first class. The luxury of it all made my stomach churn, the softness of their smiles in contrast to the emptiness I felt. Every detail was sharp and deliberate: designer luggage, sparkling drinks served by attendants, the glow of the resort swimming pool reflecting off their sun-kissed faces. I scrolled again, hoping my eyes were deceiving me, hoping this was some curated illusion, but no, every post was as real as the pit forming in my chest. Then I saw it, a caption that felt like a punch I hadn't anticipated. "Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making this possible." My throat tightened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, almost typing out a snide comment, a pointed question. But I stopped. I couldn't let my anger speak before I understood the full picture. I leaned back, gripping my phone, heart hammering with a combination of envy, confusion, and disbelief. How could they claim they couldn't afford a vacation for me when they had facilitated such extravagance for my sister's family? I closed my laptop and ran a hand over my face. The room was silent, but my mind buzzed with every little memory that now felt like proof. Birthdays that had been overlooked, achievements that had been quietly celebrated without acknowledgement, the quiet moments when I had wanted to share excitement with my parents, only to be met with distraction or a subtle shrug. Each memory flared, stinging, reinforcing the image of my parents' favoritism. I paced the apartment, my mind working overtime. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? Confrontation felt premature, but silence seemed unbearable. I needed to see how far this went, to observe carefully before making any move. My instincts told me that there were layers to this story, subtle signs and hints that I had missed before. The social media posts were just the tip of the iceberg, I realized. For the next few days, I checked their updates with a mix of dread and fascination, studying each post, each comment. I observed not only the vacations but also subtle interactions, the way my parents commented on Ava's posts with warmth and enthusiasm, the quick likes and supportive emojis, the quiet absence of similar engagement on my own posts. Every gesture and omission felt like a message, one I wasn't supposed to decode but could not ignore. I found myself imagining conversations that never happened, hypothesizing reasons, motives, and secret considerations behind every decision my parents had made. Each scenario sparked a roller coaster of emotions, anger at perceived injustice, sadness at being overlooked, and an almost guilty relief that I still cared enough to feel deeply. These were feelings I had tucked away for years, but now they surged with clarity and force. Walking past the living room, I noticed the faint glow of the television where my parents were watching an old family show. I wondered what they would think if they knew I had seen the truth, the discrepancy between their words and actions, the privilege they reserved for Ava's family. My mind spiraled into what-ifs, each possibility darker and more tantalizing than the last. I almost wished they would say something, anything, that would allow me to test their reactions. But no words came, only silence met me, pressing against my ears. The days that followed became a delicate dance. I maintained my usual routines with them, spoke politely, laughed when prompted, yet observed everything with precision. Subtle hints slipped into my conversations. A remark about vacation planning, an innocent query about future trips, a passing comment on Ava's photos. My parents responded with casual, almost dismissive tones, but beneath their composure, I caught glimpses of unease. Small shifts in expressions, a tightened smile, a lingering pause. Those tiny cracks thrilled me silently. At night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed every post, every comment, every gesture I had witnessed. I began to construct a mental map of their priorities and biases, identifying patterns that had been invisible to me before. The injustice was no longer abstract. It had become tangible, a puzzle I needed to solve. I couldn't confront them blindly, not yet. I had to gather evidence, watch, and wait. The anticipation built in me a mixture of nervous excitement and cautious anger, a tense rhythm that pulsed alongside my own heartbeat. And yet, amid all the frustration, I allowed myself moments of quiet reflection, those rest periods that kept my emotions in check. I would sit on the balcony, cup of tea in hand, watching the city lights flicker, imagining a version of my life where fairness existed, where my parents saw me as equal to Ava and her children. These moments kept me grounded, reminded me that my feelings were valid, and that my desire for justice did not make me petty or vengeful. I found myself asking questions I did not yet voice aloud. Should I confront them now, or wait until I had undeniable proof? Should I let my anger show or play the part of the obedient, patient daughter while plotting my next steps quietly? And in those moments, I realized just how deeply their favoritism had cut, how it had shaped my understanding of myself within the family, and how much careful strategy would be required to navigate this labyrinth of emotion and expectation. I thought back to Ava's smiling faces, the captions, the laughter captured in photos. I felt the familiar sting of jealousy, but alongside it, a flicker of resolve. I would not act recklessly. I would not lash out in anger. Instead, I would observe, collect, and wait, turning every micro detail into a tool, every seeming oversight into a piece of the puzzle. The story was far from over, and I intended to see it through to the end, on my own terms. As I closed my laptop for the night, I whispered quietly to myself, "They think I don't know. They have no idea." And in that whisper was both a warning and a promise, a seed of determination that would grow in the days ahead. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but one thing was certain. I was no longer just a passive observer. I had begun my careful watch, and the narrative of fairness and maybe justice was slowly, deliberately taking shape. The next weekend, I visited my parents' house under the guise of a casual Sunday lunch, though every step I took was calculated, every smile carefully measured. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of observation settle over me. Their home looked ordinary at first glance, familiar in ways that should have brought comfort. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to notice the small details that painted a different picture. A brand new espresso machine sat gleaming on the counter alongside imported coffee beans that I knew cost far more than anything I could afford for myself. On the living room shelves, I noticed rare bottles of wine lined up in a way that seemed almost like a display. Each label screamed extravagance, a silent testament to resources my parents claimed they didn't have. I moved through the house quietly, careful not to alert them to my scrutiny. My fingers itched to snap photos, and I did, one by one, documenting every expensive gadget, every luxurious item that contradicted their carefully crafted narrative. My heart raced with a mix of adrenaline and frustration. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together evidence that confirmed my suspicions. And yet, I didn't confront them. Not yet. I wanted the full picture before speaking, the proof strong enough that no denial could dismantle it. As I lingered in the kitchen, I noticed an envelope tucked under the mail pile. It wasn't addressed to me, and I almost ignored it, but something urged me to peek. Inside were brochures and booking confirmations for an upcoming resort vacation, complete with dates, activities, and pricing. My stomach dropped. My parents were planning another trip, one that I hadn't been told about, one that clearly indicated the family had resources to spare. I tucked the envelope back carefully, my mind racing. This wasn't just favoritism toward Ava anymore. It was deliberate, and now I had tangible proof. I sat down at the dining table with a cup of tea I didn't really taste, letting my thoughts swirl. Anger rose in me first, a hot, tight knot in my chest. How could they be so careless with their honesty? How could they expect me to accept their excuses after seeing such blatant contradictions? Then came the sadness, a deeper, quieter ache that reminded me of every overlooked birthday, every achievement celebrated quietly for Ava but passed over when it came to me. And beneath all that, a flicker of self-reproach. Had I been too naive, too willing to believe them without question? I excused myself quietly and went to the study, my journal open on the desk. Writing calmed me, offered a space to let the whirlwind of emotions settle. I documented what I had seen, the envelope, the gadgets, the wine, the signs of luxury scattered throughout the house. Each sentence was both a record and a release, a way to channel the mix of frustration and sadness into something tangible. Writing allowed me to breathe, to pause, to process the storm inside me before it could erupt. Later, as I sat on the balcony, sipping the now lukewarm tea, I allowed myself to remember simpler times, the moments when family meant unconditional warmth. Those memories softened my anger briefly, reminding me that my parents weren't villains in the traditional sense, but deeply flawed humans capable of favoritism and oversight. This rest period in my emotional rhythm was necessary, a breathing space before I would escalate my observation into action. It helped me regain perspective, to see not only the injustice, but also my own resilience in the face of it. I returned to the living room where my parents were chatting casually, completely unaware of my scrutiny. I smiled politely, joined the conversation in a light, seemingly detached manner, but my mind was elsewhere, cataloging every movement, every phrase, every subtle indication of their true priorities. I noticed a particular glance exchanged over a wine glass, a brief, knowing look that seemed almost conspiratorial. My curiosity spiked. What were they planning behind my back, and why had they left me out? Later that evening, back in my apartment, I reviewed the photos I had taken, lining them up side by side with Ava's posts on social media. Patterns emerged, expensive items, undisclosed trips, small but significant signs that confirmed my suspicions. And then, just as I was about to set the photos aside, a notification pinged from my phone. It was a new picture from Ava, one I hadn't expected, her children laughing around a massive birthday cake, clearly celebrating some event I hadn't been invited to. My stomach sank again. There it was, another subtle confirmation of exclusion, another micro-clue that my parents' favoritism was ongoing and deliberate. I sat on the edge of my bed, journal open once more, pen poised. I wrote quickly, letting the words flow without editing. Observations, emotions, questions. I wrote about anger, frustration, hurt, and disbelief, but also about determination. The pieces were falling into place, forming a map of actions, omissions, and choices. I knew I couldn't confront my parents blindly. Not yet. I needed more. Evidence, timing, precision. By the time the night deepened, I had cataloged everything carefully, every photo, every brochure, every social media post. My mind was buzzing with possibilities, strategies, and a cautious, simmering excitement. This wasn't just about exposing favoritism anymore. It was about reclaiming a sense of fairness and respect that had been quietly denied to me for years. And somewhere beneath the anger and disappointment, I felt a flicker of control. I leaned back, closing my journal and letting the room fall silent around me. The envelope, the gadgets, the wine, Ava's photos, all of it added up to a story I was beginning to understand. A story that had been unfolding without my knowledge. I clenched my fists lightly, feeling the pulse of determination and patience. The secret world of favoritism and privilege that my parents had constructed was now visible to me, and I intended to watch, to wait, and to act at the right moment. A soft chime from my phone startled me. It was another photo from Ava, this time showing an itinerary, highlighting luxury activities that my parents had helped arrange. My breath caught. Another layer revealed. The puzzle was bigger than I imagined, and the micro cliffhanger loomed. How far were they willing to go, and what else had I yet to uncover? I arrived at my parents' house with a calm smile, one I had practiced countless times in front of the mirror. From the outside, I appeared relaxed, cheerful even, but beneath that veneer, every nerve was alert, every sense sharpened. I had learned to move like a shadow in their home, to observe without revealing, to listen without asking too many questions. Today, this skill would be tested more than ever. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and lingering spices greeted me. My parents looked up and smiled, thinking perhaps I had arrived to enjoy a quiet afternoon, unaware of the scrutiny I was about to put them under. I returned their smiles with perfect politeness, hung up my coat, and made my way to the living room, pretending to admire the family photos on the shelves. Each image I glanced at was a piece of their curated narrative, vacations, achievements, and celebrations, none of which had included me in the way they had included Ava's family. I sat down with them, exchanging casual conversation about the weather, work, and trivial family updates. Every word I spoke, every laugh I offered, was carefully measured. I was a performer on a stage I had known all my life, but the script had changed. I was no longer just the obedient daughter. My eyes scanned the room constantly, noting subtle details, new gadgets on the counters, fresh packages on the porch, receipts in the mail stack, all evidence of the hidden world of privilege I was piecing together. I asked about Ava in a light, conversational tone, letting the question linger just long enough to draw attention. "So, I saw Ava's trip photos," I said casually, careful to sound neutral. "That resort looks incredible. The itinerary must have cost a fortune, right?" My father chuckled lightly, as if dismissing my curiosity. My mother smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. But I noticed a fleeting flicker of something, unease perhaps, a subtle shift in the eyes, a hesitation in the tone, micro-expressions that most people would miss. But I didn't. We moved to the dining table for lunch. I let the conversation drift naturally, sprinkling in remarks about travel articles I had read, destinations I had dreamed about, and casually mentioning the high costs of luxury resorts. "It's amazing how much goes into just a week of resort activities," I said softly, letting my words hang. My parents nodded politely, laughing at what seemed like innocent observations, but I caught it. A split second of tension, a tightening around the corners of their mouths, a brief pause before swallowing. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough for me to know they were aware of what I suspected. After lunch, I wandered into the living room, admiring the books on the shelves, flicking through magazines, pretending to browse. My mind was cataloging every interaction, every gesture, every word that could hint at their priorities. I felt a thrill of anticipation, a pulse of excitement mingled with caution. Every glance exchanged between my parents was another micro-clue, a thread I could follow. I brought up Ava again, this time more pointedly. "I heard she booked some exclusive spa sessions and private excursions. That must have been expensive. Did you help her with the arrangements?" I asked, voice light but firm enough to elicit a reaction. My father laughed easily, almost dismissively, as if brushing off my concern, but his eyes betrayed him. A quick, flickering glance between my parents, a tightening of the jaw, and I knew they were uncomfortable. We moved on to general conversation, yet I continued to drop subtle hints. I mentioned online reviews of luxury resorts, casually remarked on hidden fees and extras that many guests overlooked. Each statement was carefully chosen to remind them silently that I was paying attention, that I knew more than I let on. Their smiles remained, polite but slightly forced, and every so often I caught that flash of unease, a crack in the otherwise seamless facade. As the afternoon wore on, I allowed myself a small mental smile. I wasn't confronting them openly, but I was planting seeds of awareness. I was signaling that I knew, without needing to shout, without needing to accuse. Each carefully placed word, each casual question was a nudge, a test, a probe into the hidden truths they thought I hadn't discovered. At one point, I excused myself to the balcony, claiming I needed some air. Alone for a few minutes, I let myself think clearly, plotting my next steps. I reviewed the subtle reactions I had noticed, the fleeting expressions of worry, the small hesitations in their laughter. I considered how I could gather further evidence, how I could craft the eventual revelation without tipping my hand too soon. Returning to the living room, I resumed casual conversation, lightly touching on travel blogs, luxury accommodations, and the joys of planning a family holiday. Each remark was designed to be innocuous yet pointed, to keep them slightly on edge while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. I could feel the tension rising subtly, the room filled with unspoken words and hidden awareness. When it was time to leave, I thanked them for lunch, smiling warmly, while inwardly I relished the subtle victory of my controlled observation. I had planted hints, tested reactions, and left them unaware of the full extent of my knowledge. Their smiles were polite, but behind them I had glimpsed worry, the faintest recognition that their carefully constructed narrative was not as hidden as they believed. Later, back at my apartment, I reviewed every detail in my mind, replaying gestures, words, and micro-reactions. I felt the familiar pulse of anticipation, the thrill of a plan taking shape. Every small interaction had served a purpose, every hint a piece of the puzzle. And though I had not confronted them fully, I knew the momentum was shifting, the game had begun. As I closed my eyes that night, a final thought lingered. They might still think I was unaware, that my visit had been casual and routine. But I knew the truth, and that knowledge was mine alone for now. The seeds had been sown, the subtle warnings planted, and soon enough, the full picture would emerge. And when it did, they would understand that I had seen it all, patiently, quietly, and with purpose. It had been exactly a week since my subtle tests at my parents' house, and the anticipation had grown into a quiet, simmering energy inside me. I had gathered every piece of evidence I could, photos, receipts, online posts, social media interactions, and even little details from casual conversations that hinted at favoritism. Today, I decided it was time to bring it all together, carefully, without anger or accusation, but with precision enough to make them see what they had hidden from me. I arrived at their house carrying a folder, simple and unassuming, as if it contained mundane paperwork rather than the culmination of days of careful observation. My parents greeted me with the usual smiles, unaware of the storm that had been quietly brewing in my mind. I returned their smiles politely, placing the folder on the coffee table. "I wanted to share something with you," I said lightly, flipping it open to reveal the photos and receipts in chronological order, side by side with screenshots of social media posts. I made no accusatory gestures, no harsh words. I let the evidence speak for itself. My parents exchanged glances, casual at first, but I noticed the tiny shift in their posture, the stiffening of shoulders, the subtle avoidance of eye contact. It was almost imperceptible, but I had learned to read these signs. I walked them through the folder, pointing out patterns, coincidences, and the glaring disparities between what they had told me and what reality showed. Each image, each comment, each receipt was a quiet but undeniable accusation. See here, I said, turning a page. These are the posts from Ava's trip, first-class seats, resort bookings, and special excursions, all organized with your help. And then these receipts from last month show wine, electronics, and other expenses that don't align with tight finances. I let my words hang in the air, calm and deliberate. A faint flicker of tension passed over their faces. My mother's lips tightened briefly. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The micro cliffhanger settled in naturally, the room filled with a quiet but intense pressure. I said nothing more, watching their reactions carefully, letting the weight of evidence sink in. No words were necessary. The discomfort was evident, almost palpable. They attempted to dismiss some of the points with casual laughter and explanations, but the cracks were showing. Every subtle glance, every momentary hesitation told me they knew the truth now, even if they were unwilling to admit it aloud. I felt a mix of satisfaction and relief, a quiet thrill that my patience and careful planning had created this moment. Then I leaned back slightly, letting a small, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips. I had another layer, another twist to reveal. Also, I said softly, I've been planning my own trip with Emma next month. We've booked a little getaway, something simple but refreshing. I thought it would be nice to have a break, just us. My words were light, but the implication was clear. I didn't need to compete. I didn't need revenge. I was independent, capable, and able to enjoy life without letting their favoritism control me. Their eyes widened subtly, surprise flickering across their faces. The dynamic shifted. I had taken control of the narrative without confrontation, asserting my independence while highlighting their unfairness. They hadn't expected this, and the room's energy changed from tense to a quiet recognition of my newfound agency. I felt the emotional sin curve rising. Anger from earlier was fading, replaced by relief, pride, and a sense of empowerment. I closed the folder slowly, letting it rest on the coffee table, signaling that the evidence was there and the conversation could end if they chose. My tone remained calm, measured, inviting, yet firm in its implication. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of what's been happening, I added softly. Transparency is important, isn't it? My mother finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. Lily, we didn't realize how it looked from your perspective. My father nodded, rubbing his hand across his forehead, a subtle acknowledgement of guilt and discomfort. I simply nodded back, keeping my expression gentle but steady, allowing them to process without pressure, giving them space to feel the impact of their own actions. The silence that followed was telling. I could feel them grappling with shame, confusion, and surprise all at once. And in that silence, I felt my own emotions settle into a steady rhythm. The storm of anger that had brewed over the past weeks softened into calm. The hurt and betrayal transformed into a quiet pride for handling the situation with strategy and composure. Later that evening, I sat by the window in my apartment, reflecting on the day. I thought about the subtle power of observation, patience, and the careful gathering of evidence. I realized that confrontation didn't always require shouting or aggression. Sometimes, the quiet accumulation of truth and the measured unveiling could achieve far more. I thought about my upcoming trip with Emma and felt a surge of anticipation and joy. This was my reward, my way to reclaim agency over my own life without resorting to bitterness. It was a demonstration of independence, resilience, and emotional intelligence. The twist within the twist was complete. My parents had seen the proof, understood the imbalance, yet I had not needed to attack them. I had won quietly, firmly, and gracefully. By the time I went to bed, I felt a mixture of satisfaction, pride, and a calm excitement for the future. The tension from earlier had given way to relief, and the narrative had shifted in my favor. I knew I had set boundaries, reclaimed my dignity, and preserved my integrity. The experience left me stronger, wiser, and ready to continue observing and navigating my family dynamics with patience and clarity. A small smile curved my lips as I closed my journal that night. I had navigated anger, disappointment and frustration turned them into strategy and emerged not only victorious but empowered. The story had taken a turn I hadn't dared to hope for, and I felt a surge of quiet triumph, the kind that comes from knowing you've acted with intelligence, patience, and heart. The morning after my careful unveiling, I woke with a sense of anticipation mingled with apprehension. My parents had contacted me the night before, their voices tentative, hesitant, yet genuine in a way I hadn't heard for years. "Lily, we need to talk," my mother said softly over the phone. I felt a pulse of nerves, but also an odd sense of readiness. After days of strategizing, observing, and collecting evidence, I was prepared for this confrontation, or rather, this acknowledgement. When I arrived at their house, the air felt different, charged but calm, as if the tension from our previous interactions had condensed into a fragile, suspended moment waiting to be released. My father stood in the doorway, hands loosely clasped, eyes avoiding mine at first. My mother's face was lined with worry, her usual composure softened by the weight of realization. There was no need for preamble. I could feel their understanding even before words were spoken. We've been unfair," my mother began, her voice tentative, a tremor of emotion betraying her. "We didn't realize how our actions appeared. We should have been honest with you, and we made choices that weren't fair." She paused, searching for my reaction, perhaps unsure if I would respond with anger or cold detachment. I let the silence stretch, taking in every inflection, every subtle gesture. Their discomfort was clear, but sincere. I nodded slowly, letting the acknowledgement sink in. "I see that now," I said, my voice calm yet measured. "I've felt overlooked, yes, but I understand that people make mistakes. What matters now is honesty going forward." The words were gentle but firm, a signal that boundaries were being established alongside forgiveness. My father cleared his throat and added, "We're sorry, Lily, for the favoritism, the lack of transparency, everything. You deserved better." The sincerity in his tone was unmistakable. I allowed a small, soft smile to appear, acknowledging their apology while keeping the emotional balance I had cultivated over the past weeks. It wasn't a complete absolution, but it was a start. We sat together at the dining table, the awkwardness slowly easing as conversation flowed in small, careful steps. I shared memories, both fond and frustrating, letting them know how their choices had affected me without resorting to accusation or anger. They listened, really listened, and for the first time, I felt a bridge forming, tentative, fragile, but real. After the discussion, I stepped away to collect my thoughts. I walked into the study, opening my journal to write, to process the emotions swirling inside me. I wrote about relief, the soft satisfaction of having been heard, and the subtle pride in managing the entire revelation with composure. Writing allowed me to honor my feelings without letting them dictate my actions impulsively. It was my way of grounding myself, of observing my own emotional growth alongside the reactions of my parents. Later, I went to the balcony, breathing in the evening air, letting it cool the remnants of tension from the day. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The frustration of being denied a family vacation, the shock of seeing Ava's extravagance, the painstaking collection of evidence, and the careful planting of hints that had led to this moment of recognition. Each stage had been a lesson, a calibration of patience, strategy, and emotional intelligence. I smiled faintly at the realization that I hadn't needed to become someone I wasn't, a cold, calculating strategist. I had remained emotionally engaged, intelligent, and sensitive, and yet I had achieved the outcome I desired: acknowledgement, apology, and a reclaiming of respect and agency. The catharsis was deep, a release of accumulated tension that left me feeling lighter, clearer, and proud of myself. As I sat there, the city lights stretching beyond the balcony, I considered the complexity of family love. It wasn't perfect, it never had been, and perhaps it never would be. But in its imperfection, there was value. The recognition, the apology, the willingness to try. These were the elements that made it precious. I could accept flaws, I could set boundaries, and still feel love. I realized that maturity wasn't about expecting perfection. It was about navigating imperfection with grace, empathy, and intelligence. Returning inside, I found my parents in the living room, quietly sipping tea. The atmosphere was lighter, the tension dissipated, yet a sense of awareness lingered, a mutual understanding that things would be different going forward. I sat down, joining them, feeling both relief and empowerment. I had faced emotional turbulence, navigated complex dynamics, and arrived at a point of clarity and calm. Later that night, in my apartment, I reflected further. The entire experience had transformed me. I wasn't just a daughter who had been overlooked. I was someone who had asserted herself thoughtfully, strategically, and emotionally. I felt pride, a sense of accomplishment that was internal and enduring, not reliant on anyone else's validation. I opened my journal one last time, writing a summary of my thoughts, my emotions, and the lessons I had learned. I acknowledged the pain, the frustration, and the moments of self-doubt, but I also celebrated the patience, the clarity, and the resilience that had carried me through. I felt connected to myself in a way I hadn't before, and that connection was empowering. Finally, I allowed myself a quiet smile, closing the journal. Family, I realized, would never be perfect, but it was mine. And now I had a sense of balance, boundaries, and appreciation that made the imperfections bearable and even meaningful. The journey had been difficult, emotionally complex, and sometimes painful, but it had left me stronger, wiser, and more attuned to my own needs and values. As I lay down to sleep, I whispered to myself, I forgive, I understand, and I am proud of who I am. The weight of past frustrations lifted, replaced by a warm, steady sense of self and a profound acknowledgement that love, even imperfect love, was still worth treasuring. In that quiet realization, I felt a deep, resonant catharsis, the kind that leaves one fully human and fully alive.